The gown in the foyer on. The morning of December 13th, 1887, the richest man in Pittsburgh descended the grand staircase of his Fifth Avenue mansion and stepped into a nightmare. Cornelius Vandermark, steel magnate, empire builder, self-proclaimed titan of industry, found his wife's emerald silk gown laid out across the Persian rug in the foyer, arranged not in a heap, not discarded, but displayed, as though the fabric itself had become a corpse at rest. The gown was still warm to the touch, scented with lavender and faintly, disturbingly, with something chemical, something wrong. But Evangeline Vandermark was nowhere in the house. The locks were secured from within, the windows sealed against the bitter Pennsylvania frost, the snow outside untouched by human footstep. A woman of flesh and voice and laughter had vanished into thin air, leaving behind only the careful impression of her presence, and a single torn page scrawled in her unmistakable hand. The truth must survive. It was a mystery that would swallow reputations, fracture loyalties, and haunt the city for decades. And like all tragedies of that gilded age, it began not in the moment of disappearance, but in the long shadows leading up to it. A city of smoke and gold inn. The winter of 1887, Pittsburgh burned ceaselessly, not with flames, but with ambition. The skyline glowed with the angry red mouths of steel furnaces, belching soot that drifted into parlors, bedrooms, and lungs with equal disregard. Smoke stained the heavens, and the Allegheny River ran thick with runoff from mills that never slept. For those who labored in the furnaces, the city was a machine of bone and blood, chewing men into ash for a meager day's wage. For the few, who owned those furnaces, it was an empire, a throne from which they ruled like American kings. Among these iron-crowned lords, Cornelius Vandermark reigned supreme. His fortune was measured not in dollars but in railroads, warships, bridges, and banks. He was, by all appearances, untouchable, but wealth built on secrets corrodes from the inside. And in the great Gothic fortress he called a home, something had already begun to rot. Evangeline Hartwell. Vandermark Evangeline was 25 when she married Cornelius, 20 years his junior, radiant with auburn hair and the air of New England. Refinement. She had been raised not only to dazzle ballrooms, but to think, to read, to question. Her education was the kind offered only to the daughters of Boston's banking elite, and she carried with her a cultivated elegance that made Pittsburgh society gasp with envy when she arrived as Cornelius's bride. At first she seemed a jewel perfectly set in his iron crown. She presided over lavish gatherings, charmed senators, and spoke French to visiting dignitaries with a fluency that thrilled and intimidated in equal measure. But behind her polished smile burned a conscience. By 1887, she was no longer the sparkling centerpiece of society dinners, but a woman withdrawn, restless, and preoccupied with a private pursuit no one in the mansion could quite name. Her footsteps carried her beyond the manicured gardens into neighborhoods of soot and hunger. She lingered in kitchens where millwives stirred pots of thin soup, in alleyways where the maimed and scarred limped home from shifts that broke them. She listened, asked questions, and began to write, always to write. In a leather-bound journal she kept locked with a small brass key at her neck. That journal would become her most dangerous possession. The mansion on Fifth Avenue, the Vandermark mansion, was less a home than a proclamation. 4 stories of Gothic revival stone crowned with turrets. Its gargoyles leered over Fifth Avenue like watchmen. Inside, imported marble and stained glass refracted gaslight into jeweled shadows, while a ballroom large enough to swallow 300 souls stood waiting for the next gala. Servants moved with clockwork precision, 12 in total, all sworn to discretion. But the house itself was no mere ornament. Within its walls were secret passages, ventilation corridors, servant tunnels, concealed chambers, an architecture of shadows threaded through the grandeur. Few outside the family knew these existed, and fewer still knew what they had been used for. Evangeline would discover them, and that discovery would seal her fate. The last evening, December 12th, began, like any other day of ritual. Dinner was served precisely at 7. Roasted pheasant, winter vegetables, French wine. Cornelius, flushed with triumph, spoke animatedly about a railroad contract. Evangeline, pale and distracted, barely touched her food. Margaret Sullivan, the Irish housekeeper, would later recall how Evangeline's gaze kept darting to the frost-laced windows, as though she were waiting for someone, or dreading them. At 9:30, Evangeline retired not in her customary nightdress, but in that Parisian emerald gown, a garment of silk and beads so elaborate it seemed absurdly theatrical for an evening without guests. Margaret assisted her, and when she clasped the bodice, Evangeline embraced her with sudden trembling warmth. "You've been like a mother to me," she whispered. It was a farewell disguised as gratitude. By 11, the groundskeeper Thomas Brennan saw her light burning in the second-floor study. Through the frosted glass, he watched her hunched over her desk, writing furiously. That would be the last living glimpse anyone admitted to seeing. What he could not see was what she was writing, the final pages of an indictment that named her husband not as a magnate, but as a murderer. The vanishing, when morning came, the mansion lay in silence. The front door bolted from within, windows sealed, snow outside undisturbed, a perfect white skin without blemish, and in the foyer, her gown, still warm, laid out as though some invisible hands had prepared her absence for display. Beside it, the note, "The truth must survive." But the truth was slippery. Evangeline's wedding ring lay abandoned like an afterthought, yet the silver locket, the one she had guarded with almost religious care, was gone. The rug beneath the gown bore faint discoloration, as if something had been cleaned, scrubbed, away. And in the air lingered not just lavender perfume, but a whisper of ether, of chloroform, something sharp that prickled the nose. When Cornelius arrived, summoned by panicked staff, he did not rage, did not weep. He stared at the gown for a long, frozen moment. And then, to the astonishment of every servant present, his first order was not to call the police, but to seize Evangeline's journals and bring them to his office. Margaret swore she saw fear in his eyes, not the fear of loss, but the fear of discovery. Later that day, Thomas Brennan made his own inspection of the grounds. Near the old ice house, a squat stone structure long unused, he noticed something out of place. The snow was perfect, unbroken, except there, where the faintest discoloration seeped upward through the powder. Dark stains, old as the night, fresh as dread. When he bent closer, he realized it was blood. Before he could investigate further, Cornelius himself appeared, his voice sharp with command. "The ice house is unsafe. No one is to enter. Do you understand?" Thomas nodded, but in his chest his heart hammered, because he did understand. Whatever had happened to Evangeline Vandermark, whatever unholy fate had snatched her from the world, its secret was buried not in thin air, but in that ice house, and Cornelius intended to keep it there. The investigation that never was. A city holding its breath. Word of Evangeline Vandermark's disappearance did not spread slowly. It erupted. By mid-morning, the whispers had already left the mansion and rolled like fog through Pittsburgh streets. The wife of the Steel King had vanished inside her own home, without sign of entry or exit. Servants in other great houses repeated the tale with embellishments. Some claimed blood was smeared on the walls, others that her ghost had been seen in a mirror. The newspapers, bound by unspoken alliances with industrialists, printed only the briefest of notices. Society matron unwell. Vandermark family requests privacy. But in the taverns where mill workers drank away their wages, the story bloomed into a symbol. "If they can disappear a woman inside her own castle, one man muttered, what chance do the rest of us have?" Pittsburgh was a city built on fear as much as fire. And now that fear had a new name. The Vandermark Mansion. Detective Samuel Crawford. The case fell to Detective Samuel Crawford, a 20-year veteran of the Pittsburgh police. Crawford was not the kind of man who impressed at galas or smoked cigars in gentlemen's clubs. He was lean, prematurely gray, and carried about him the grim patience of someone who had spent decades staring at corpses no one wanted to claim. Crawford had little taste for the theatrics of the city's elite. He had grown up in the soot-darkened tenements, the son of a mill worker who died coughing coal dust before his 40th birthday. Every scar on Crawford's face was a reminder that the men who owned the city's furnaces also owned its laws. He knew the moment he was assigned to the Vandermark case that he would not be investigating a disappearance. He would be managing a scandal. Still, he listened carefully, and he noticed what wasn't being said. The servants speak, and don't Crawford's. First interviews were with the staff, gathered like frightened children in the dining hall. Margaret Sullivan, the housekeeper, trembled as she recounted the gown, the note, the strange farewell embrace. Thomas Brennan described the light in Evangeline's study and the dark stain by the ice house. Charles Henley, the butler, admitted that Cornelius had seemed expectant during dinner, checking his watch as though awaiting a signal. But here, the testimony began to splinter. Each servant remembered fragments, but when asked to repeat themselves in Cornelius's presence, their stories bent like iron under a hammer. Margaret fell silent, her jaw tightening. Brennan looked at the floor. Henley claimed perhaps he had misremembered. Crawford knew the signs. Fear wasn't just haunting the mansion, it was ruling it. Cornelius takes control. When Crawford requested to see Evangeline's study, Cornelius refused. "My wife's personal effects are private," he said, his voice calm but edged. "This is a family matter, Detective." "I expect your discretion," Crawford pressed. The law required a search of the last known place the woman had been seen. Cornelius's reply was chilling in its simplicity. "The law, my good man, is what men like. Me fund. Be careful where you apply it." Instead, Cornelius provided a tidy explanation. Evangeline, he said, had suffered from delicate nerves. She was prone to hysteria, melancholy. She had been seen writing fantastical notes in her journal. Perhaps she had wandered into the night in a fit of madness. Perhaps she had chosen to leave. It was a story designed for sympathy and dismissal, and Crawford knew it stank of lies. A note of fear late that night. Crawford sat alone at his desk in the police precinct, studying the page torn from Evangeline's journal. The truth must survive. The handwriting was steady, deliberate, not the scrawl of hysteria. The ink was fresh. And something about those 4 words struck him less as a plea than as a command. She had known. But where was the rest of the journal? Margaret had spoken of it. Servants had seen her writing in it daily. Now Cornelius claimed no such thing existed. Crawford made a decision then. If he wanted the truth, he could not look for it in reports or official channels. He would have to dig in the shadows, the very place the Vandermarks lived their lives. The ice house. The following evening, Crawford slipped onto the Vandermark estate without fanfare. Snow muffled his boots. The mansion glowed faintly with gaslight, but his destination was not the house. It was the stone ice house at the rear of the grounds. The structure hunched into the hillside like a crypt. Its door was bolted with fresh iron, the mortar around. It seems new, too new. Crawford crouched and touched the ground where Brennan had reported the stains. The snow was crusted, but beneath, yes, darker soil, sticky even in the cold. He rubbed it between his fingers. Blood. But more unsettling still was what he heard when he pressed his ear to the stone. A hollow resonance. The ice house was not empty. Something had been sealed inside. He scribbled a note in his pocket ledger. Evidence concealed. Requires warrant. But in Pittsburgh, warrants against men like Vandermark were fantasies. The Watchers. From that night on, Crawford felt eyes on him, a figure lingering too long at the corner when he walked home, the sound of footsteps matching his in the fog. At the precinct, his case files were moved, rearranged. One morning, he found a dead rat nailed to his office door, a note pinned beneath, its stiff paw. "Stop digging." He told no one. He had seen too many men silenced, their families ruined, because they believed the badge could shield them from power. But he continued anyway. The missing brother tracing Evangeline's family led him east to Boston. There he discovered the curious death of her father, Harrison Hartwell, a banker who had supposedly hanged himself in his office the year before. The file was pitifully thin, witness statements missing, coroner's notes vague. A night watchman had reported seeing 3 men leaving the building around the time of death, but that detail had been buried. And then there was Edmund Hartwell, Evangeline's younger brother. Officially, he had gone west to seek fortune in California. In reality, his trail ended in Chicago, under assumed names, staying in cheap hotels, always moving. Crawford began to suspect the brother was alive, and that Evangeline's journal, her whispered truth, was tied to him. A private conversation on December 16th, Dr. Franklin Westbrook, the Vandermarks' personal physician, requested to meet Crawford in confidence. They met in a smoky tavern on Liberty Avenue. Westbrook's hands trembled as he lifted his glass. She was frightened, the doctor confessed. Not of illness, of him. She begged me to help her escape, though she never said from what. Her pulse was fast, her hands unsteady, but her mind was clear. Crawford leaned closer. Then why not speak openly? Westbrook's gaze dropped. Because Cornelius pays my salary, and because men who defy him tend not to live long. He slid something across the table, a folded scrap of paper torn at the edges. It was in Evangeline's hand, a fragment of her missing journal. The words chilled Crawford to the marrow. The circle watches all. If I vanish, Edmund will know where to look. The following morning, Crawford returned to his office to find his desk drawers rifled through. His ledger with notes about the ice house, gone. The fragment of Evangeline's writing, gone. Pinned neatly to the inside of the drawer was a single calling card, unmarked except for 3 words scrawled in careful ink. The circle knows Crawford. Stared at it until the edges of the card blurred. He realized with cold clarity that he was no longer investigating a missing woman. He was trespassing into a conspiracy vast enough to swallow him whole, and the circle had already noticed. Secrets beneath Stone, a city that refused to see Pittsburgh in that winter of 1887, had no shortage of horrors. Men burned alive in furnace. Explosions. Children starved in alleys. Women vanished into back rooms of tenements and were never spoken of again. But Evangeline Vandermark's disappearance was different. It hovered over the city like coal smoke, suffocating yet invisible. Everyone knew, and no one dared say it aloud. Detective Samuel Crawford felt it most keenly. Each time he stepped outside, he noticed faces turn away, conversations pause, as though the whole city had silently agreed. Evangeline never existed. Nothing happened on Fifth Avenue. Keep walking. But Crawford could not. He was already too deep, his fingers stained with the blood he had scraped from the ice house's frozen soil. He could not unknow what he had touched. A visit in the fog-on. The 5th night of his inquiry, Crawford left the precinct long after dark. A fog had rolled down from the river, thick enough to erase the world beyond an arm's reach. He lit his pipe, a small act of defiance against the encroaching silence. That was when he heard the voice. Detective. A woman's whisper. Close, enough that his breath caught. He spun, hand on his revolver. Out of the mist stepped Margaret Sullivan, the Vandermark housekeeper. Her face was pale, her shawl pulled tight. "They'll kill you if you keep on," she murmured. "They've already marked you." Crawford kept his voice low. "Then help me end it. Tell me what you know." Her lips trembled. She hid things, in the house, in places Cornelius never found. But you must never search alone. Before he could press her, she thrust a brass key into his palm, closed his fingers around it, and vanished back into the fog. Crawford stared at the key under the gaslight. It was small, delicate, engraved with Celtic knots. The key to Evangeline's journal desk, the one Cornelius had claimed did not exist. The library at midnight 2 nights later, Crawford returned to the mansion under the pretense of interviewing Cornelius again. The steel magnate greeted him with cold courtesy, but his eyes glittered like shards of ice. "You persist, detective," Cornelius said, pouring brandy with unhurried elegance. One might mistake persistence for obsession. I only want the truth, Crawford replied. Cornelius's smile was thin. Truth is a luxury. Men of vision require practicality. He dismissed Crawford with deliberate finality, but the detective did not leave. Instead, he slipped away into the shadows of the mansion, moving with the silent certainty of a man who knew his life depended on each step. The library loomed like a cathedral of secrets. Thousands of books lined the walls, their spines glinting in the dim gaslight. Crawford found the writing desk Evangeline had favored. Its drawer was locked, just as Margaret had said. The brass key slid in with a perfect click. Inside lay a bundle of pages bound in ribbon. Evangeline's handwriting filled them, neat yet urgent, each line a confession. Crawford read by the light of a trembling match. They kill to build. Father was right. The circle is real. They hide their murders and accidents, their thefts and investments. I cannot stay silent. If I vanish, know that their power reaches the courts, the papers, even the pulpit. Only Edmund and I remain. The truth waits in the ice. The match hissed, out. The library plunged into darkness. And in that blackness, Crawford heard the unmistakable sound of a footstep behind him. The hidden passage. He turned sharply, revolver drawn. Nothing. Only the silence of thousands of unread books. But then, another sound, a faint draft, the smell of cold stone. Crawford pressed against the far wall and felt it shift just slightly beneath his weight. A hidden panel. He wedged it open with the butt of his revolver. Behind it yawned a narrow passage, brick and timber. Descending into blackness, Evangeline had found this place. Crawford could almost feel her presence in the stale air. He lit another match, then a small lantern. Shadows stretched grotesquely along the tunnel walls as he descended. The passage wound beneath the mansion, damp with condensation. At its end, he found a wooden door, iron-banded, locked from the outside. The key from Evangeline's desk did not fit. But when he pressed his ear against the door, he heard something that made his skin crawl. The faint scratching of nails against wood. Old. Echoed, but real. He stumbled back, heart hammering. Whoever had been inside had clawed to get out. The circle revealed. When Crawford emerged from the passage, the mansion was not silent. Through the sliver of a cracked door, he saw Cornelius in his study, meeting with three men he recognized from society columns, railroad barons, coal magnates. They were speaking in hushed tones, but Crawford caught fragments. The ice house is sealed. Her brother still alive. Documents must never surface. The circle will not tolerate loose ends. The circle, not rumor, not paranoia. They were real. He pressed closer to hear more, but the floor creaked. Cornelius's head snapped up. Blue eyes like knives met Crawford's through the door crack. "Detective," Cornelius said smoothly as though expecting him. "Join us." A game of masks. Crawford stepped into the room, revolver hidden at his side. Cornelius gestured him toward the firelight. "These are my colleagues," Cornelius said, "men of industry, men who shape the destiny of this nation. And here you are clinging to the fate of one fragile woman. Tell me, do you truly believe her life outweighs progress itself?" Crawford met his gaze. "I believe murder is murder, no matter how you dress it in steel and smoke." The men chuckled softly like wolves amused by prey's defiance. One leaned forward. "Detective, the circle rewards loyalty. Choose wisely. There are fortunes to be made, and graves to be dug." Crawford realized then that this was not intimidation. It was recruitment. They believed every man had a price, and Crawford, silently gripping the stolen journal pages in his coat pocket, understood his defiance had just signed his death warrant. That night, as Crawford walked home through the snow, he felt the street empty behind him. Too empty. He reached his boarding house door and struck a match to light his lamp. Pinned to the wood with a steel nail was Evangeline's missing locket. the one she'd worn the night she vanished. It was smeared with dried blood, and inside, instead of a photograph, was a folded scrap of paper bearing just 5 words in an elegant feminine hand. "You're already inside." The ice beneath the veins. The locket's warning Detective Samuel Crawford hardly slept after finding Evangeline's blood-stained locket nailed to his door. It wasn't only the gruesome symbol, it was the note inside, those 5 chilling words. "You are already inside." Inside what? The circle's grip? The mansion's hidden labyrinth? Evangeline's very fate? By dawn, Crawford's resolve hardened. If the circle thought to frighten him away, they had miscalculated. He would go where they least wanted him to tread. The sealed ice house. The descent through frost, the Vandermark estate loomed under a bleak winter sky. Snow muffled every sound, except for the distant groan of ironworks from the riverfront. Crawford moved quickly, avoiding the main house, circling toward the back gardens where the ice house hunched against the hillside like a tumor. By outward appearance, it was nothing. A squat stone building, roof sagging under snow, its door crusted over with a wall of fresh mortar. But to Crawford it radiated menace, the way a locked coffin radiates dread. He pried away at the mortar with a crowbar until his knuckles bled. Hours passed. Finally, the iron hinges groaned, and the door inched open. A breath of air rushed out, so cold it felt alive, sharp enough to sting his throat. Lantern held high, Crawford stepped inside. The vault of echoes. The air was glacial, damp with the mineral bite of stone. The ice house had not held ice in years, yet the walls sweated with condensation, as though the building itself wept. At first glance, the chamber was empty. Bare stone, drainage grooves, abandoned hooks in the ceiling where ice blocks once hung. But the silence was wrong. It pressed in, muffling his heartbeat. Then Crawford noticed the floor. Thin trails of rust brown staining the grooves, old blood darkened by time. He followed the stains toward the rear wall, where the stonework looked uneven. He pressed his hand against it. Hollow. With a grunt, he shoved aside a loose block. The lantern light spilled into a cavity beyond, a crawl space lined with shelves, and on those shelves lay objects that froze him more than the winter air ever could. A woman's shoe, a torn ribbon of emerald silk, bundles of papers wrapped in oilcloth, and bones. So many bones, stacked like butcher's refuse. Evangeline's. Echo Crawford's breath misted in harsh bursts. He set the lantern down and unwrapped the oilcloth bundles. Inside were sheaves of papers in Evangeline's hand, diagrams of mills, lists of names, dates of accidents. Proof that the circle had staged dozens of killings, and tucked among the papers a letter addressed simply, E. His hands trembled as he opened it. Brother, if you are reading this, I have failed. They suspect. The circle watches my every step. I leave these notes here because the house is no longer safe. Father was murdered. They will not hesitate to do the same to me. If I do not return, know that the truth is buried beneath the ice. Trust no one inside Pittsburgh. Our childhood vow must hold. Justice, even if it takes blood to pay for it. Signed. Evangeline's final confession. But before Crawford could absorb its full weight, a sound slithered through the chamber. The creak of the ice house door closing. Sealed. Inside he spun. The door, his only exit, was swinging shut. Shadows moved beyond the threshold. Voices murmured. Then the thud of mortar being slapped against stone. They were sealing him in. Crawford lunged, slamming his shoulder against the door, but the fresh mortar held firm. Panic surged. His lantern flickered. The temperature seemed to drop further. His breath smoked white. He shouted, hammering at the door with the crowbar. But the voices outside only grew fainter, more deliberate, as if mocking his desperation. Then came silence. He was entombed. Whispers in the dark. The lantern guttered low. Crawford's pulse thundered in his ears. But soon he realized it wasn't, only his heartbeat. There was another sound, whispering, faint, distorted, as if carried through stone. Words he could not make out, but voices layered upon voices. Men, women, some weeping, some laughing. The dead, pressed into the walls. Crawford pressed his palms over his ears. "No," he rasped. "Not real." But the whispers grew clearer. One voice, a woman's, rose above the others. "Sam." He froze. "Evangeline." Her tone was urgent, pleading. "Not all secrets are buried. Look beneath." The lantern hissed out. Darkness swallowed him. The trapdoor. Beneath blind, Crawford dropped to his knees, feeling the floor with frantic hands. His fingers brushed against iron, an old latch set flush with the stone. A hidden trapdoor. Summoning every ounce of strength, he pried it open. A rank draft rose up, fouler than anything he had ever smelled, the stench of rot and chemicals. He lowered himself into the abyss, guided only by touch. A narrow tunnel descended deeper into the hillside. Its walls were damp, its air choking. He crawled on, lungs burning, until the tunnel widened into a cavern. There, by the faint phosphorescent glow of decaying fungus, he saw them, rows of wooden crates, each stenciled with the names of companies long destroyed by accidents. He pried one open. Inside, ledgers, blueprints, letters in Cornelius Vandermark's hand. Proof not just of murders, but of a conspiracy stretching across states, implicating senators, judges, bankers, and beside the crates lay bodies, fresh ones. Workers who had vanished in recent weeks, their faces slack, their throats discolored as if by poison. Crawford staggered backward, bile rising in his throat. The whispers in the cavern swelled, almost deafening now. One corpse's eyes snapped open, clouded, milky, yet fixed on him. Its lips moved, and in Evangeline's unmistakable voice it whispered, "They already know you are here." Lanternless, entombed beneath the earth, surrounded by the evidence of a conspiracy, and by the impossible echo of a dead woman's voice, Detective Samuel Crawford realized he had not uncovered the Circle's secrets. He had walked straight into their altar, hunted in the smoke shadows in the foundry. Detective Samuel Crawford emerged from the ice house just before dawn, shaking, soaked in sweat, despite the frigid air. He carried nothing but Evangeline's locket and a single ledger page torn from the crates below. By the time he reached his boarding house, the page was gone. His pockets were empty. Someone had taken it. The realization hit him like a hammer. He was no longer an investigator. He was prey. The vanishing city. Over the next 3 days, the city itself seemed to shift beneath his feet. Witnesses he had spoken to now claimed ignorance. Margaret Sullivan, the loyal housekeeper who had whispered her fears, was dismissed from the Vandermark household overnight. When Crawford went to find her, neighbors said she had boarded a train east at dawn. Her rooms were stripped bare. Not a trace of her remained. At police headquarters, his desk was cleared, his files gone. "Administrative mistake," the captain mumbled. But his eyes were cold, warning Crawford not to press further. Even his mail betrayed him. Envelopes slit open and resealed with immaculate care, as though invisible hands thumbed through his private life. Pittsburgh was not a city anymore. It was a stage set, and every actor knew their lines except him. The meeting at Braddock's Tavern on the 4th night, a messenger slipped Crawford a note beneath his door. Midnight. Braddock's Tavern. Alone. The tavern crouched on the edge of the Monongahela, half hidden by steel foundries belching smoke, into the night. Inside it reeked of sweat and coal dust. In the far corner sat a man cloaked in shadow. He raised a glass but did not drink. "Detective Crawford," the man murmured. "You are in grave danger." The voice was educated, clipped, and familiar. Crawford leaned closer. "Edmund Hartwell." The man's eyes flickered, then hardened. "Names will get us both killed. Listen carefully. My sister gathered everything, ledgers, letters, photographs. Some of it is still safe. But Cornelius has hunters in every alley. They know you've seen too much." "Where is the evidence?" Crawford demanded. Edmund hesitated. "Hidden where the Circle cannot reach. Yet. But you cannot act from inside. This city. You must leave tonight. Chicago, Boston. Anywhere but here. Before Crawford could reply, the tavern door burst open. 4 men in long coats entered, faces obscured by soot-stained scarves. Their boots struck the floor in unison. Circle. Enforcers. The tavern froze. Edmund's voice was barely audible. Run. The pursuit. Through iron, Crawford bolted through the back door into the foundry yards, Edmund vanishing in the opposite direction. The air was thick with furnace smoke, choking, red embers swirling like fireflies. The enforcers followed, shadows, moving with inhuman precision. Crawford sprinted between towering stacks of pig iron, his lungs burning, the clang of pursuit echoing in the steel jungle. He ducked beneath a conveyor chute, narrowly avoiding a bullet that sparked against iron. Behind him, the circle wasn't only hunting, they were sending a message. No corner of Pittsburgh was beyond their reach. At last, he stumbled into a coal shed and slammed the door, chest heaving. The footsteps closed in, then stopped. Silence. When Crawford turned, he realized he wasn't alone. A figure stood in the dark, backlit by the glow of the furnaces. A woman's figure. Emerald silk shimmered faintly in the half-light. Evangeline's ghost? Evangeline, Crawford whispered. The figure tilted its head. No eyes, only hollow sockets gleaming with coal dust. When it opened its mouth, the voice that spilled out was hers. Clear, urgent, desperate. You cannot fight them, Samuel. You can only outlive them. He stumbled back, fumbling for his revolver. But when he blinked, the figure was gone. Only the stench of coal and a whisper of lavender perfume remained. The door burst open. The enforcers flooded the shed. Crawford fired once, twice, striking one man in the shoulder, sending him sprawling. But the others surged forward. He crashed through the rear wall, tumbling into the river ice below. The current seized him, dragging him under. Washed-up hours. Later, he awoke on the muddy banks miles downstream. His revolver was gone, his lantern gone, his strength nearly gone. But clutched in his hand, torn, waterlogged, was a scrap of paper he didn't remember grabbing. 4 words, written in Evangeline's script. The truth must survive. Crawford staggered to his feet, half delirious. He looked toward the city skyline, black stacks, glowing furnaces, the beating iron heart of the Circle's empire, and he realized something that hollowed him out with dread. The Circle hadn't been trying to kill him that night. Not yet. They were hurting him. Toward what he could not yet see. But in the choking dawn, as the furnaces roared and the city awoke, one truth became clear. The hunters had turned the whole city into a trap, and Samuel Crawford had already stepped inside its jaws. The tomb, behind the walls, the return to Fifth Avenue. Detective Samuel Crawford should have left Pittsburgh the moment he dragged himself from the Monongahela's icy grasp. But flight wasn't in his blood. Instead, bruised and half-mad with exhaustion, he returned to the place where it all began, the Vandermark mansion. By day, it stood like a fortress, a Gothic citadel crouched on Fifth Avenue, its turrets clawing the sky. By night, it was worse. Windows glowing like watchful eyes, gargoyles sneering at intruders. Crawford waited until the hour before dawn, when servants slumbered and Cornelius himself was rumored to pace his study alone. Then he slipped across the frost-crusted gardens and pressed his shoulder to the massive oak door. It swung open, unlocked, waiting, almost as if someone wanted him to enter. The Library of Secrets. The library smelled of ink, dust, and faint lavender. Thousands of volumes loomed in the dark, their spines catching candlelight. Crawford felt it immediately, the wrongness of the space. The walls didn't match the exterior dimensions of the house. He pressed his palms along the oak paneling. Heart pounding. At last, one section gave with a dull click, swinging inward to reveal a narrow stairwell. He descended into the dark, lantern trembling in his hand. What lay beneath was no mere passageway. It was a chamber, sealed in silence, lined with shelves. Bundles of papers, ledgers, photographs nailed to the stone, and in the far corner, something that turned his blood to ice. A skeletal form slumped against the wall, still draped in the tatters of emerald silk. A rusted chain glimmered at its throat, clutching a locket inscribed with a single word. Father, Evangeline Vandermark. Her final words, near the bones lay a cracked journal, its final page scrawled with trembling hand. Crawford raised it to the lantern light. They think this chamber will bury me, but the walls cannot silence truth. Edmund, if you read this, remember our promise. The circle must be broken. The blood of our father cries out from the grave. If I perish here, let my death be the fire that burns their empire. The words blurred as Crawford's hand shook. Evangeline hadn't vanished into thin air. She had been bricked alive behind her own library wall, silenced by the man who swore to love her. But her archive survived. Every ledger, every secret meeting, every sabotage disguised as accident, all preserved in the chamber's stale air, the confrontation. Remarkable, isn't it? The voice came from behind him. Smooth, cold, and familiar. Cornelius Vandermark stepped into the chamber, lantern in hand. His steel-blue eyes glowed like twin furnaces in the dark. You've seen too much, detective, he said softly. But don't think yourself special. You've simply joined a long line of dreamers who believed justice could triumph over industry. They all ended up the same way. Dust in forgotten rooms. Crawford raised his revolver. Then let me be the one who doesn't. Cornelius smiled. You won't pull that trigger, because deep down you understand what Evangeline never did. Progress demands sacrifice, and the world is built not by saints, but by men willing to soil their hands. The fire in the chamber for a moment, silence thickened between them, only the hiss of gaslight and Crawford's ragged breath. Then Cornelius hurled his lantern into the shelves. Flame roared across paper, igniting Evangeline's archive in a sudden inferno. Her life's work, her proof, turned to cinders in seconds. Crawford lunged, but Cornelius struck him, sending the revolver clattering across the floor. The two men grappled in the choking heat, shadows thrashing against stone walls. Through the smoke, Crawford glimpsed Evangeline's bones, her hollow sockets watching, and he felt a surge of fury greater than fear. He slammed Cornelius against the wall, teeth clenched. You killed her. You killed them all. Cornelius laughed even as fire licked the hem of his coat. History won't remember her, or you, only steel. The collapse. The chamber's ceiling groaned. Flames devoured its beams. Smoke thickened until the world shrank to red haze. Crawford seized his revolver, pressed it to Cornelius's chest. But the floor gave way. Both men plunged into darkness as stone cracked and shelves collapsed. Crawford struck cold earth. For long seconds there was only silence save for the crackle of fire above. Then, a faint groan. Cornelius lay broken but alive, his chest rising shallowly, and around them, the chamber walls shuddered, ready to bury them both. The choice Crawford staggered to his knees, choking on smoke. His revolver lay near Cornelius's hand. One pull of the trigger would end the monster's reign forever. But Evangeline's final message burned in his mind. The truth must survive. If he shot Cornelius, the circle would replace him with another face. If he escaped with even a scrap of evidence, Evangeline's sacrifice might still mean something. The walls groaned again. Stones rained down. Time was gone. Crawford snatched the red journal from the rubble, its last pages smoldering but legible, and fled toward the stairwell. Behind him, Cornelius's laughter echoed one final time, then was swallowed by the roar of collapse. Epilogue. The smoke never clears. Days later, the Vandermark mansion stood in ruins, consumed by a fire officials called accidental. No trace of Evangeline's remains was ever acknowledged. No investigation was opened. Detective Samuel Crawford vanished from Pittsburgh shortly after, leaving behind only rumors. Some said he fled to Chicago with damning papers. Others whispered he was silenced like the rest. The circle endured. Industries expanded. Fortunes multiplied. But in certain circles of Boston and Chicago, anonymous letters began arriving. Letters containing fragments of ledgers, names of conspirators, and whispers of a woman in emerald silk who had died for the truth. And in Pittsburgh, on fog-choked nights when the furnaces roared and the Allegheny winds carried smoke through the streets, servants swore they saw her, a figure gliding along Fifth Avenue, gown shimmering, locket glinting in the dark. Evangeline Vandermark, bricked, alive but never silenced. Her ghost a reminder that the empire of steel was built not on iron but on bones.